Waverly Bishop 32 never expected that a simple pair of distressed jeans would be the catalyst for uncovering decades of family secrets. As she sat across from her parents at the Metropolitan Club's exclusive Sunday brunch, their condescending laughter at her appearance echoed through the marble halls. Little did they know, the ownership papers for their beloved social club were folded in the back pocket of those very jeans. Before I dive into the full story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy family revenge dramas. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how my parents' faces changed when they realized their social climbing had finally hit a ceiling they couldn't break through. Growing up as the only daughter of Theodore and Eleanor Bishop was like living in a perfectly curated museum. Everything in our household was selected for appearance, rather than function or comfort. My parents were social climbers of the highest order, having clawed their way from middle-class backgrounds to the upper echelons of Boston society through calculated marriages, strategic business deals, and a ruthless willingness to step on anyone who stood in their way, including me. From the earliest age I can remember, I was molded to be an extension of their ambitions. Piano lessons weren't about music appreciation, but about performing at charity galas to impress potential business partners. My education wasn't about learning, but about making connections with the children of influential families. Even my wardrobe was meticulously selected to reflect the Bishop brand: conservative, expensive, and designed to blend in with old money circles, despite our relatively recent arrival. The Metropolitan Club had been the crown jewel of my parents' social aspirations for as long as I could remember. Founded in 1891, it represented old Boston money exclusivity and the kind of generational wealth that my parents desperately wanted to be associated with. For 15 years, they had been provisional members invited to certain events but never granted full membership status, despite donating obscene amounts of money to club initiatives. I had been the perfect daughter until I turned 18. I maintained straight A's at my prestigious private school, never dated anyone, my parents didn't pre-approve, and smiled through countless boring dinner parties where I was paraded like a show pony. But something broke inside me during my first semester at Harvard, yes, the college my parents had selected since my birth, and had donated a wing to increase my chances of admission. I realized I was living someone else's life. During sophomore year, I changed my major from business economics to environmental science without telling them. When they discovered my betrayal at graduation, my father's face turned a shade of purple I'd never seen before, and my mother wept as though I had died, rather than chosen a different academic path. "You've thrown away everything we've built for you," my father had hissed under his breath as we posed for family photos, his arm around my shoulder squeezing so tight it left bruises. "This environmental nonsense won't get you anywhere in life," my mother added later at my graduation dinner, picking at her salmon as though my career choice had ruined her appetite. After graduation, I made another decision they considered unforgivable. I moved to Colorado to work with a conservation nonprofit instead of accepting the corporate position my father had arranged in Boston. The distance I put between us was both geographical and emotional. Our communication dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional email. For 8 years, I built my own life far from their influence. I developed a successful career in environmental consultation, specializing in helping corporations implement sustainable practices, ironically the kind of businesses my father often invested in. I found friends who valued me for my authentic self rather than my family connections. I even fell in love with Owen, a wildlife photographer who saw beauty in the natural world rather than in designer labels. But then came the call that would change everything. My maternal grandmother Beatrice, the only family member who had ever truly accepted me as I was, had passed away suddenly. Despite our estrangement, I returned to Boston for her funeral. What I didn't expect was the private meeting with her lawyer afterward. Your grandmother was quite adamant about her wishes, Mr. Harrington explained, sliding a sealed envelope across his desk. She asked that this be given to you privately with no other family members present. Inside was a letter written in my grandmother's elegant script and a key to a safety deposit box. The letter changed everything I thought I knew about my family, and that key would unlock secrets that had been buried for decades. Secrets that would give me the power to shake my parents' carefully constructed world to its core. The safety deposit box contained documents that made my hands tremble as I read through them in the privacy of the bank's viewing room. Among the yellowed papers and old photographs was the truth about how my family had actually acquired their wealth, and it was nothing like the narrative my parents had crafted. Theodore Bishop, my father, hadn't built his investment firm from the ground up through hard work and business acumen as he'd always claimed. His initial capital had come from blackmailing his former boss, a respected investment banker who had been embezzling client funds. Rather than reporting him, my father had leveraged his knowledge to extract enough money to start his own firm, then continued to collect consulting fees for years afterward. My mother's story was equally disturbing. Her first marriage hadn't ended because her husband was unfaithful, as she'd always told me. According to letters between my grandmother and her sister, Eleanor had orchestrated a complex scheme to frame her first husband for tax evasion, then divorced him while he was under investigation, managing to secure a generous settlement. Before the charges were eventually dropped, she had met my father at a legal consultation regarding her divorce, and they had recognized in each other a shared ruthlessness that became the foundation of their relationship. But the most shocking document was a deed of ownership for 60% of the Metropolitan Club. My grandmother Beatrice, whom my parents had always dismissed as a sweet but irrelevant old woman, had been quietly buying shares in the club for decades. As one of the few female members from the 1962nd, she had recognized early on that the club's antiquated structure was unsustainable, and she had positioned herself to eventually control it. My dearest Waverly, her letter read, I've watched how Theodore and Eleanor have treated you, trying to force you into a mold that was never meant for you. I've also watched them chase acceptance from people who will never truly welcome them, no matter how much money they donate or how many connections they forge. The Metropolitan Club has been their white whale, the symbol of all they desire but cannot truly have. I am leaving my controlling interest in the club to you, not out of malice, but because I believe you have the wisdom and heart to transform it into something better than a playground for the privileged. Use this power wisely, my darling girl. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. Attached was a detailed accounting of my parents' underhanded tactics over the years, the families they had stepped on, the rumors they had spread, and the people they had discarded when no longer useful. My grandmother had been quietly documenting it all, perhaps knowing this day would come. I spent the next 3 days in my hotel room, barely sleeping as I processed everything I had learned. I consulted with Mr. Harrington about my legal position, completely solid, and spoke with the club's manager, Mr. Reynolds, who had been aware of my grandmother's ownership but had been sworn to secrecy. He seemed relieved that someone new would be taking the helm, and surprisingly open to the ideas I hesitantly began to share. The club has been losing younger members for years, he confided. Your parents' generation is holding on to traditions that don't make sense anymore. We need to evolve or we'll become irrelevant. By the end of the week, I had made my decision. I would accept my grandmother's bequest and use it to implement the changes she had envisioned, opening membership to a more diverse group, creating sustainability initiatives, and transforming the club from an exclusive bastion of privilege to a community hub that still maintained its historic charm while acknowledging the changing world. But first, I needed to confront my parents. I called and suggested we meet for Sunday brunch at the club. My mother sounded surprised but pleased, perhaps thinking my return to Boston signaled a return to the fold. Dress appropriately, Waverly, she reminded me, as though I were still a child. The club has standards. I hung up with a smile, already knowing exactly what I would wear and how the scene would unfold. The stage was set for a confrontation that had been brewing for years. As I laid out my outfit for Sunday, ripped jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and my grandmother's vintage Hermes scarf, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Justice was about to be served, and it would be both cold and very, very public. Sunday arrived with perfect late autumn weather, the kind of crisp, clear Boston day that makes the city's historic architecture look like something out of a fairy tale. I took my time getting ready, carefully selecting which elements of my appearance would most irritate my parents while still giving me the confidence I needed for what was coming. The ripped jeans were designer, an expensive brand, ironically, but distressed enough to appear casual and inappropriate by my parents' standards. I paired them with white sneakers rather than heels and applied minimal makeup. My grandmother's vintage Hermes scarf was my one concession to luxury, tied loosely around my neck, a subtle nod to her presence with me today. I arrived at the Metropolitan Club 10 minutes early, nodding to Mr. Reynolds at the front desk, who gave me a discreet thumbs up. He had been briefed on what was about to happen and had arranged for us to be seated at my parents' favorite table, centrally located, so they could see and be seen by everyone who mattered in their social circle. My parents arrived with typical precision at 11:30 a.m., my father in a tailored navy suit, despite it being the weekend, my mother in a conservative Chanel dress with pearls. Their expressions when they spotted me were almost comical, a mixture of horror at my appearance and forced pleasantness for the benefit of onlookers. "Waverly, darling," my mother air-kissed both my cheeks, her grip on my arm tightening painfully. "Couldn't you have found something more appropriate to wear? This is the Metropolitan, not a coffee shop in whatever mountain town you're living in now." My father didn't even attempt a greeting, simply looking me up and down with a grimace before taking his seat. "I see your fashion sense has deteriorated, along with your career choices," he muttered, snapping open his napkin with unnecessary force. I smiled, feeling strangely detached from their criticism. "It's good to see you both too. How have you been?" What followed was 20 minutes of my parents dominating the conversation with carefully curated updates about their lives, the charity boards. My mother had joined my father's recent business successes, their summer trip to the Amalfi Coast, where they dined with a minor European royal. They asked perfunctory questions about my life, but interrupted before I could answer fully. "Still working with that environmental group?" my father asked, signaling to the waiter for more coffee. "Actually, I started my own consulting firm 2 years ago. We help companies transition to sustainable." "That's nice, dear," my mother cut in. "Did you know the Caldwells finally got their son into Princeton? After that unfortunate incident with the marijuana, we all thought his chances were ruined, but apparently a new library donation smoothed things over." I let them ramble, watching as they periodically glanced around the dining room to see who was noticing them with their shabby, disappointing daughter. I spotted several of their friends pretending not to stare while whispering behind menus. The stage was perfectly set. When our main courses arrived, I waited until my father was mid-bite into his steak before I spoke. "I've been meaning to tell you both something important," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I've recently acquired a new property. A significant investment, actually." My mother's interest was immediately piqued, property ownership being one of the metrics by which she judged success. "Oh, where is it? Not one of those rustic cabins in Colorado, I hope." "No, actually," I replied, taking a sip of my water. "It's right here in Boston. You might be familiar with it. You're eating in it right now." The confusion on their faces was priceless. My father stopped chewing his fork suspended in midair. "What are you talking about, Waverly?" he demanded. I reached into the back pocket of my offensive jeans and pulled out the folded ownership documents, sliding them across the table. Grandma Beatrice left me her controlling interest in the Metropolitan Club. I now own 60% of this establishment. As of yesterday, I'm not just a member, I'm your boss. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face drained of color before flushing an alarming shade of red. My mother's hand flew to her pearls, clutching them as though they might protect her from this new reality. "That's impossible," my father finally sputtered. "Beatrice was just a legacy member. She didn't own any part of the club." "Actually, she did," I countered calmly. "She's been quietly buying shares since 1968. She was quite strategic about it, something I apparently inherited from her rather than from you." My mother found her voice, though it was higher than usual. "Why would she do such a thing, and why would she leave it to you instead of to us?" The genuine confusion in her tone almost made me pity her. Almost. "Because she saw how you treated people, Mom. How you used them and discarded them. How you valued status over substance. She left me detailed records of every family you've stepped on to climb your way up Boston's social ladder." I turned to my father, whose jaw was clenched so tight I could see a muscle twitching. "She also documented how you really started your investment firm, Dad. The blackmail money. The ongoing consulting fees you extracted. I wonder what the SEC would think about that." "You're threatening us," he hissed, leaning forward. "Your own parents." "Not threatening," I clarified, "just explaining the new reality. I'm making changes to the club effective immediately. The membership committee will be restructured, the sustainability practices overhauled, and the club will begin hosting community events for organizations that support causes I believe in." I stood up, placing my napkin beside my barely touched food. "Oh, and I've scheduled the first event already, a fundraiser for first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds. As the club's most prominent members, I expect you both to attend and donate generously. Mr. Reynolds has the details. He's quite excited about the club's new direction." Around us, I could see other diners openly staring now, some whispering frantically to each other. News would spread through their social circle like wildfire. "You can't do this," my mother whispered, tears forming in her eyes, whether from sadness or rage I couldn't tell. "This club is everything to us." "I know," I replied softly. "That's precisely the problem." As I walked away from the table, leaving them in stunned silence, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. This wasn't just about revenge, though. The look on their faces had been satisfying. It was about finally breaking free from the shadow they had cast over my life. Outside on the club's historic steps, I took a deep breath of crisp autumn air. My phone buzzed with a text from Owen. "How did it go?" I smiled as I typed my response. "Better than expected. I'll tell you everything tonight." The confrontation was over, but the real work transforming the club, healing from my past, and building my future on my own terms was just beginning. The week following the brunch confrontation was a whirlwind. News of my inheritance and the scene at the club spread through Boston's upper social circles with stunning speed. By Monday afternoon, I had received 17 calls from club members, some expressing outrage, others curious about my plans, and a surprising number offering support for the changes I had outlined. "The club has been stagnant for too long," confessed Mrs. Harrington, a widow in her 70s who had been a friend of my grandmother. "Beatrice and I often discussed how it needed fresh blood, but we couldn't get past the old guard. She would be proud of you, dear." My parents predictably moved from shock to tactical planning. On Tuesday, my father's attorney called with a thinly veiled threat about contesting the inheritance. I simply forwarded him to Mr. Harrington, who had prepared for this exact scenario. By Wednesday, they had shifted strategies. My mother appeared at my hotel with tearful pleas about family loyalty and tradition. You don't understand what you're dismantling, she sobbed in the hotel lobby, drawing stares. This club has been the center of our social standing for decades. That's exactly the point, Mom, I replied calmly. You've built your entire identity around exclusivity and status. Maybe it's time to find meaning somewhere else. When emotional manipulation failed, they tried bribery. My father offered to fund my environmental consulting firm for 5 years if I would reconsider some of the more radical changes I had proposed. The fact that he suddenly found value in my career only when it served his purposes spoke volumes. Through it all, I remained steadfast, working closely with Mr. Ball, Reynolds, and a small committee of forward-thinking members to implement the first phase of changes. We revised the membership criteria to focus on contributions to community and professional achievement rather than family connections and bank accounts. We hired a sustainability consultant to overhaul the club's operations from energy use to food sourcing, and we scheduled a calendar of events that would open the historic building to diverse groups who had been systematically excluded for generations. But the personal toll was heavier than I had anticipated. Each night, I returned to my hotel room, emotionally drained, questioning whether I was doing the right thing. Was I any better than my parents if I used power to impose my vision, even if that vision was more inclusive? Was I motivated by justice or by revenge? The line seemed to blur sometimes, especially when I caught myself enjoying the discomfort of those who had looked down on me for years. Owen flew in from Colorado on Thursday, his presence a steadying force as we walked through Boston, common fallen leaves crunching beneath our feet. You're not your parents, Waverly, he assured me when I voiced my doubts. You're using this inheritance to open doors, not close them. There's a fundamental difference. His perspective helped, but I still felt the weight of responsibility. On Friday night, as we prepared for the first event under my leadership, a cocktail reception for the newly formed Community Engagement Committee, I found myself staring at my reflection in the hotel mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at me. I had straightened my usually curly hair and chosen a conservative black dress that could have come from my mother's closet. "This isn't you," Owen said, gently coming up behind me. "You don't have to become someone else to prove you deserve this position." He was right. I let my hair return to its natural state and changed into a colorful dress that better reflected my personality. As we entered the club that evening, I felt more centered, more authentic. The reception was a success beyond my expectations. The mix of traditional members and new faces created an energy the staid old building hadn't seen in decades. Conversations flowed between people who would never have met under the old regime, and I overheard genuine exchanges about collaboration rather than the usual superficial social chatter. I was deep in conversation with a local environmental activist about potential partnerships when I felt a presence beside me. Turning, I found myself face to face with my father, looking uncomfortable in this new version of his beloved club. "Could we speak privately?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. In the club library, a wood-paneled room that had witnessed countless business deals and political maneuvers, my father paced while I sat calmly in a leather armchair. "I've been doing some thinking," he began awkwardly. "About what you said. About how we've lived our lives." I waited, expecting another angle of attack, another attempt to regain control. "Your grandmother," he continued, "she never approved of me. From the day I married Eleanor, Beatrice saw through me. I always thought it was snobbery that I wasn't from the right family. But maybe she saw something else." The vulnerability in his voice was so unfamiliar that I found myself leaning forward, truly listening. "I built everything we have on the foundation of a crime," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent 30 years looking over my shoulder, wondering when it would all collapse. The constant striving, the need for more status, more security. It was never about ambition, Waverly. It was about fear. For the first time, I saw my father not as the towering, infallible figure of my childhood, but as a deeply flawed man trapped in a prison of his own making. It didn't excuse his behavior toward me or others, but it helped me understand it. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. He sighed heavily. "I don't know. Your mother is not handling this well. Our friends are divided, some distancing themselves, others suddenly interested in this new direction you're taking. It's like our entire world has shifted overnight." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," I suggested. "Maybe this is a chance to build something real instead of something that just looks impressive from the outside." He nodded slowly, though I could see he wasn't fully convinced. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "You're a lot like her, you know, Beatrice. She had that same steel in her spine, that same clarity of vision. I should have seen it in you sooner." After he left, I remained in the library processing the interaction. It wasn't forgiveness. We had too much history for something that simple, but it felt like the first honest conversation we'd ever had. A small crack in the facade that might with time allow for something more authentic to emerge. I rejoined the reception, finding Owen chatting animatedly with a group of new committee members. His eyes found mine across the room, questioning. I gave him a small smile and a nod. We had a long way to go, but tonight felt like a beginning. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself standing alone in the main hall, looking up at the portraits of past club presidents, all men, all cut from the same cloth. Soon mine would join them, a different kind of leader for a different era. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders, but it felt less like a burden now and more like purpose. I'd come to Boston seeking closure and perhaps a bit of justice. I was leaving with something I hadn't expected, a chance to create meaningful change, and maybe, just maybe, heal some very old wounds along the way. Before I head into what happened next, I'd love to hear if any of you have ever been in a situation where family expectations clashed with your authentic self. Drop a comment below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're enjoying this journey. The turning point in this story is coming up next, and trust me, you won't want to miss how the tables continue to turn. 2 months after the infamous brunch, I had relocated temporarily to Boston to oversee the club's transition. Owen returned to Colorado to manage his photography commitments, but flew in every other weekend, providing much-needed perspective when I found myself getting pulled into the politics and drama of my new position. Not everyone was pleased with the changes I was implementing. A vocal minority of longtime members, led by the Whitcomb family, old friends of my parents, who had held significant influence over club operations for decades, were mounting an organized resistance. They began by boycotting events, then escalated to circulating a petition demanding a return to traditional club values. "They're calling you a woke dictator behind your back," reported Mr. Reynolds during our weekly meeting. "The Whitcombs have convinced about 30 members to threaten resignation if the community partnership program continues." I had anticipated resistance, but was surprised by its vehemence. These were people who prided themselves on civility and decorum, yet they were now spreading rumors about my personal life and questioning my mental stability. The irony wasn't lost on me. These so-called pillars of society were behaving like schoolyard bullies when their privilege was threatened. My parents had maintained a strategic distance since our confrontation, neither openly opposing nor supporting my initiatives. I occasionally spotted my mother having lunch with Mrs. Whitcomb, but she would pretend not to see me turning away when I entered a room. My father seemed to be taking a different approach, watching developments from afar with an unreadable expression. The situation came to a head at the quarterly board meeting in January. The Whitcomb faction had managed to secure enough proxy votes to potentially block the budget allocation for my most ambitious initiative, converting the club's rarely used third floor into a co-working space for local nonprofit organizations. As I prepared for the meeting reviewing financial projections and membership data, I received an unexpected visitor at my temporary office in the club. My father's assistant requested 5 minutes of my time delivering a sealed envelope with instructions to open it privately. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. "You might find this useful. Use it if necessary." TB curiosity overrode my suspicion. I plugged the drive into my laptop and discovered a folder containing dozens of files, emails, financial records, and photographs, documenting years of ethical violations and minor illegalities committed by various board members, including damning evidence against Harold Whitcomb. There were records of the club's maintenance funds being directed to Whitcomb's construction company at inflated rates, tax documents showing charitable donations that never reached their intended recipients, and emails discussing how to circumvent city regulations during the last renovation. My first instinct was disgust. This was exactly the kind of underhanded tactic my father would use. My second thought was more pragmatic. This was powerful leverage that could silence the opposition immediately. But using it would make me no better than those I was trying to reform. I removed the USB and slipped it into my desk drawer uncertain. Then I called the one person whose advice I truly trusted. "Your father gave you blackmail material?" Owen asked incredulously, when I explained the situation over the phone. "In his mind, he probably thinks he's helping," I replied. "This is how he's solved problems his entire life." "What are you going to do with it?" I sighed, watching snow fall gently outside my window. "I don't know." Part of me wants to expose it all, let everyone see what's been happening behind the club's respectable facade. Another part of me recognizes that using this would make me exactly what they're accusing me of, being someone who abuses power for personal gain. "There might be a third option," Owen suggested after a thoughtful pause. "One that creates accountability without resorting to your father's tactics." By the time I entered the board meeting that evening, I had made my decision. The room was tense, with clear battle lines drawn between the old guard and those who supported the club's new direction. Harold Whitcomb sat at the far end of the table, looking smugly confident in his victory before the discussion had even begun. I opened the meeting by addressing the elephant in the room. "I understand there are significant concerns about the direction I'm taking the club. Rather than pushing forward without consensus, I want to propose a compromise." This caught everyone off guard. They had expected a confrontation, not conciliation. I outlined a modified proposal for the third floor. Instead of dedicating it entirely to nonprofits, we would create a mixed-use space that served both community organizations and club members, with clear guidelines for usage, and a review period after 6 months. Additionally, I continued, I'm proposing the formation of an ethics and transparency committee with representatives from all factions within the club. This committee will have access to all financial records, past and present, and will establish new standards for contracts, donations, and community engagement. I looked directly at Harold Whitcomb as I said this last part. His face remained impassive, but a slight tightening around his eyes told me he understood the implicit message. "Why the sudden interest in ethics reviews?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Because a club with our history and standing should be above reproach," I replied evenly. "We should welcome scrutiny, not fear it. Don't you agree, Mr. Whitcomb?" The room was silent as the subtext of our exchange registered with the other board members. After a moment, Harold gave a tight nod. "I withdraw my opposition to the budget allocation provided. The space remains partially available to members as you've outlined." The meeting proceeded more smoothly than anticipated, with the compromise budget passing unanimously. As members filed out afterward, my father lingered behind, approaching me with a quizzical expression. "You had enough material on Whitcomb to remove him entirely," he said quietly. "Why didn't you use it?" "Because this isn't about winning at all costs," I explained. It's about creating something sustainable, something built on integrity rather than fear and leverage. He studied me for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his eyes. An interesting strategy. Risky but interesting. I learned something important from you and Mom, I told him. I learned exactly what kind of leader I don't want to be. The words could have been cutting, but my tone wasn't malicious, just honest. For perhaps the first time, my father seemed to truly hear me. Your grandmother once told me I had constructed a life so focused on appearances that I had forgotten to create anything of substance, he said, surprising me with his candor. I dismissed her as a sentimental old woman who didn't understand modern ambition. I'm beginning to think she understood more than I gave her credit for. He turned to leave, then paused. Your mother has been speaking with a therapist. It was her idea, not mine. She's struggling with her identity outside of all this. He gestured vaguely at our surroundings. She might reach out to you. I thought you should know. After he left, I sat alone in the boardroom, processing the unexpected developments of the evening. I had come to the meeting prepared for battle, but had somehow found a path to potential reconciliation, not just with the board members, but perhaps in time with my parents as well. Later that night, as snow continued to fall outside my apartment window, I called Owen to share the news. You found a third way, he said, pride evident in his voice. You're changing that place from the inside out. It's slow, I admitted, and there will be more resistance. But it feels right, like I'm honoring Grandma Beatrice's legacy without compromising my own values. Speaking of legacies, Owen said, his tone shifting to something more serious. I've been thinking about our future, about what we might build together. My heart quickened. What kind of future did you have in mind? One that bridges your new responsibilities in Boston with our life in Colorado. One that might eventually include more than just the two of us. If you're interested. I smiled into the phone, warmth spreading through me despite the winter chill. I'm very interested in that conversation. As we talked into the night planning and dreaming, I realized that the club, which had been the symbol of everything toxic in my family, was being transformed into something that might actually bring healing. The irony wasn't lost on me, nor was the poetic justice of it all. The resistance hadn't disappeared, but it had revealed an important truth. Real change doesn't come from destroying your opponents, but from transforming the systems that created the conflict in the first place. My grandmother had understood this when she spent decades quietly accumulating shares instead of openly fighting the club's exclusionary policies. She had played the long game, and now I was continuing her work not with revenge but with reformation. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt more at peace than I had in years. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time it was truly mine. Spring came to Boston, bringing with it cherry blossoms along Commonwealth Avenue and a new energy to the Metropolitan Club. The ethics committee had been diligently reviewing past practices. The third-floor renovation was nearly complete, and membership applications had increased by 30%, many from younger professionals attracted by the club's evolving reputation. I had settled into a rhythm, splitting my time between Boston and Colorado, where Owen and I were planning our future together. We had just begun looking at properties that could serve as both a home and a base for his photography business when an unexpected discovery upended everything once again. The ethics committee, in its review of historical documents, uncovered a set of minutes from a 1985 board meeting that had been mysteriously omitted from the official records. These minutes detailed a vote to reject a membership application from James Chen, a prominent surgeon whose family had immigrated from Taiwan. The stated reason was failure to meet club standards, but the discussion notes revealed naked prejudice with several members, including my grandfather, expressing concerns about changing the essential character of the club. What made this particularly significant was that Dr. Chen had gone on to found a medical technology company that revolutionized cardiac care. He had died 2 years earlier, leaving behind a distinguished legacy of innovation and philanthropy. His rejection from the club represented not just a moral failing, but a missed opportunity to include someone of genuine merit and contribution. More disturbing was the discovery that this wasn't an isolated incident. The committee found dozens of similar rejections over the decades, always cloaked in coded language about club fit, but clearly targeting applicants based on race, religion, or background. When the committee presented these findings at our monthly meeting, the room fell into a heavy silence. Even the Whitcomb faction seemed subdued, unable to defend what was plainly indefensible. "What do you recommend we do with this information?" I asked the committee chair, a retired judge who had initially been skeptical of my leadership but had become an ally. "Acknowledgement is the first step," he replied gravely. "We can't change our history, but we can be honest about it and make amends where possible." The discussion that followed was one of the most authentic conversations the club had ever hosted. Members shared their own experiences with exclusion. Younger members expressed their discomfort with the club's history, and even some of the old guard admitted that the practices of the past were incompatible with the values they claimed to uphold. We decided to create a formal acknowledgement of the club's discriminatory history to be displayed prominently in the entrance hall. We would also establish a scholarship foundation in Dr. Chen's name, supporting medical students from underrepresented backgrounds. And most importantly, we would conduct outreach to the families who had been rejected, offering them honorary memberships if they wished to accept. I volunteered to personally reach out to Dr. Chen's widow, a task that filled me with both trepidation and purpose. The following week, I sat in her elegant Cambridge home, humbled by her grace as I explained what we had discovered. "I knew, of course, Mrs. Chen said, pouring tea with steady hands. "James never spoke of it publicly. He didn't want to be defined by rejection, but it hurt him deeply. He had such respect for institutions and their potential to do good. The club failed him," I acknowledged, "and many others. We're trying to address that failure now, though I know it's decades too late." She studied me thoughtfully. "You remind me of him, you know. The willingness to challenge established systems from within. James eventually built his own institutions when the existing ones wouldn't have him. He would appreciate what you're doing." As we continued talking, Mrs. Chen revealed something that connected our stories in an unexpected way. Her husband had been a mentor to a young environmental scientist in the 1992nd, a woman who had gone on to found the very conservation nonprofit I had joined after college. "The world is smaller than we think, Mrs. Chen observed with a smile, "and the good we do ripples outward in ways we can't anticipate." When I returned to the club that afternoon, I found my mother waiting in my office, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Our interactions over the past months had been civil but distant. She had attended several events, gradually re-engaging with club activities, but maintaining an emotional wall between us. "I heard about the committee's findings," she said without preamble, "about Dr. Chen and the others." I nodded, waiting to see where this was going. "I was on the membership committee for 15 years, she continued, her voice tight. "I reviewed those applications. I participated in those decisions." The admission hung in the air between us. I had suspected as much, but hearing her acknowledge it was unexpected. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. "Because I've been doing a lot of thinking about who I've been, who I want to be." She met my eyes directly. "I've been complicit in hurting people, in excluding them for no reason except to maintain some illusion of superiority. And I did the same to you. I tried to force you into a mold because I couldn't imagine another way to exist in this world." It was perhaps the most honest thing my mother had ever said to me. I remained silent, giving her the space to continue. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I want to help with the scholarship foundation. I have experience with fundraising connections that could be useful. She hesitated. And I'd like to get to know the daughter I've never really seen. The olive branch was tentative, imperfect, but it was real. In that moment, I saw my mother not as the polished, unyielding figure of my childhood, but as a woman who had made choices based on fear and limited vision, who was finally recognizing the cost of those choices. We're having a committee meeting about the foundation next Tuesday, I told her. You'd be welcome to attend. It was a small step, but an important one. As she left, I reflected on how the club's reckoning with its past had catalyzed personal reckonings as well. The revelations had created space for new kinds of conversations, new possibilities for healing. That evening, I called Owen to share the day's events. His steady presence, even from a distance, helped me process the emotional weight of it all. It's like watching dominoes fall, I told him. Each truth revealed leads to another and another. Are you okay with where they're leading? He asked. I considered the question carefully. I think so. It's messy and painful, but it feels necessary, like lancing a wound so it can finally heal properly. Your grandmother would be proud, he said softly. You've turned a symbol of exclusion into a vehicle for reconciliation. His words settled something in me, a question I hadn't fully articulated about whether I was honoring Beatrice's intentions. She had given me power, but more importantly, she had trusted me to use it wisely. As spring turned to summer, the club continued its transformation. The third-floor space opened with a celebration that brought together longtime members and community partners. The Chen Medical Scholarship announced its first 3 recipients, brilliant young students who might someday change medicine as Dr. Chen had done. And the acknowledgement plaque was unveiled in a simple ceremony that several local news outlets covered, bringing long-overdue transparency to an institution that had thrived on exclusivity. My father, who had maintained a careful distance from these initiatives, surprised me by attending the scholarship announcement. He didn't speak publicly but approached me afterward. You've accomplished in 6 months what I couldn't manage in 30 years, he said, his tone difficult to read. What's that? Making this place matter. Making it stand for something beyond status. He cleared his throat awkwardly. I've decided to step back from the investment firm, bringing in new leadership, younger perspectives. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. That's a significant change. What prompted it? He glanced around the crowded reception at the diverse faces and animated conversations. Let's just say I've been reevaluating priorities. Watching you has been educational. It wasn't an apology or even a direct acknowledgement of past wrongs, but coming from my father, it represented a seismic shift. The man who had built his identity on control and power was voluntarily relinquishing both. As summer progressed, I finalized arrangements to scale back my day-to-day involvement with the club. I had accomplished what I had set out to do, establishing new leadership structures, transparency measures, and community connections that would continue without my constant presence. I would remain on the board, but would return to my life and work in Colorado with Owen. The night before my departure, I held a small dinner in the club's private dining room, bringing together the unlikely allies who had helped navigate this transition. Mr. Reynolds, the ethics committee, younger members who had embraced the club's new direction, and even a few converted skeptics from the old guard. My parents attended, sitting together but slightly apart from the main group, still finding their place in this new reality. As I looked around the table, I thought about how different this gathering was from the countless stilted club dinners of my childhood. There was genuine laughter, passionate discussion, and an energy that the state-old building had rarely witnessed. We were writing a new chapter for an institution that had been resistant to change for over a century. After dinner, I excused myself and climbed the stairs to the club's roof terrace, a space few members used, but that offered a spectacular view of Boston at night. I needed a moment alone to absorb the completion of this unexpected chapter in my life. The city lights sparkled below, familiar yet different from this perspective. I thought about the journey that had begun with a pair of ripped jeans and a brunch confrontation, how what had started as a moment of justified revenge had evolved into something far more meaningful. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find both my parents approaching tentatively. "We wanted to say goodbye properly," my mother explained, "and to give you something." My father handed me a small box. Inside was an old key with a faded tag attached. "It belonged to Beatrice," he explained, "to her first office where she started working in the 1950 seconds, when everyone told her a woman shouldn't be in finance. We found it when we were clearing some old papers." The gesture was unexpected, a recognition of the lineage of strong-willed women I came from, an acknowledgement that perhaps my grandmother's independent spirit lived on in me. "Thank you," I said, simply tucking the key into my pocket. We stood in awkward silence for a moment, years of complicated history hanging between us. "We got it wrong, Waverly," my mother finally said. "With you. With many things. We focused on appearances instead of substance," my father added. "It was a mistake." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an admission, the closest they had ever come to acknowledging their failures as parents. I didn't need them to grovel or make grand pronouncements of change. This quiet recognition was enough for now. "I'm flying back tomorrow," I told them, "but I'll be returning monthly for board meetings. Perhaps we could have dinner sometimes. Get to know each other as adults." My mother nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. My father extended his hand formally, then seemed to think better of it and awkwardly patted my shoulder instead. As they turned to leave, my mother paused. "Your grandmother once told me that true wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you build that lasts beyond you." I didn't understand her then. I think maybe you always did. Left alone again on the terrace, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for years. The club had been transformed, yes, but so had I. And perhaps in small but significant ways, so had my parents. My phone buzzed with a text from Owen, "Ready for our next chapter." I smiled, typing back, "More than ready. See you tomorrow." As I took one last look at the Boston skyline, I thought about how differently this story could have ended. I had come seeking justice, perhaps even revenge, but had found something more valuable, the chance to build something meaningful from the ruins of the past. The Metropolitan Club would continue its evolution long after tonight. My parents would navigate their new reality with varying degrees of success. And I would return to Colorado to build a life with Owen, carrying with me the lessons of this unexpected inheritance. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about winning or punishing, but about creating something better than what came before. It was about transformation rather than destruction. My grandmother had understood that all along. In her quiet, strategic way, she had set in motion not just a reckoning, but a renaissance, both for an institution she had simultaneously valued and criticized, and for the granddaughter in whom she had seen herself. 1 year after the fateful brunch that had changed everything, I stood at the podium in the Metropolitan Club's grand ballroom, surveying the crowd gathered for the Chen Scholarship Foundation's first annual gala. The room was barely recognizable, not because of physical renovations, though there had been some, but because of who filled it. Doctors from Boston's top hospitals mingled with community organizers. Tech entrepreneurs chatted with artists from the neighborhoods that surrounded the club but had rarely been welcomed within it. Club members who had initially resisted change now served on committees alongside the very people they had once worked to exclude. And in the front row sat Mrs. Chen, herself elegant in emerald silk, a guest of honor in the institution that had once rejected her husband. A year ago, I began this club was at a crossroads. For generations, it had represented tradition, exclusivity, and a particular vision of success. Today, it represents something different, a community that honors its history while acknowledging its failures, that values contribution over connection, that measures worth by what you build rather than what you inherit. From my vantage point, I could see Owen at a table near the front camera, occasionally raised to capture moments for the Foundation's website. Beside him sat my parents, still finding their footing in this transformed space, but making genuine efforts. My mother had become unexpectedly passionate about the scholarship program, leveraging her considerable social skills to raise funds and awareness. My father had joined the finance committee, bringing his expertise to bear on ensuring the club's sustainable future. Our relationships remained complex. Years of damage couldn't be undone in a single year of reconciliation, but we were learning to know each other as we truly were, rather than as we wished each other to be. We had family dinners when I visited Boston, sometimes awkward, but increasingly genuine. My mother had even visited us in Colorado, experiencing with surprised delight the beauty of the life I had built there. The Chen scholars represent the future we are building together. I continued gesturing to the 3 young medical students seated at the honored table. They remind us that talent and dedication can be found everywhere if only we are willing to look beyond our familiar circles. After my speech as the event transitioned to dinner and dancing, I circulated through the room, stopping to chat with members old and new. Mr. Reynolds, now the club's executive director, following a well-deserved promotion, joined me briefly. I never thought I'd see the day, he admitted, nodding toward a group of younger members who were enthusiastically planning the club's first ever community health fair. You know what the application rate is now, triple what it was a year ago, with a wait list for the first time in decades. People actually want to be part of this place again. Because it stands for something now, I replied. Something beyond exclusivity. Later, as I stepped outside for a moment of quiet, I found Harold Whitcomb smoking a cigar on the terrace, a habit now relegated to outdoor spaces following the club's new wellness policies. He had remained on the board, a voice of tradition, but no longer an obstructionist force. Our relationship had evolved into one of grudging mutual respect. Quite a transformation you've engineered, Miss Bishop, he said, nodding toward the ballroom. I wasn't convinced it would work. Thought you'd drive away the old membership without attracting new blood. But here we are, I replied. He inclined his head slightly. Indeed, here we are. The club is thriving differently than before, but thriving nonetheless. He tapped ash from his cigar. Your grandmother would be satisfied, I think. That matters to me, I admitted, honoring her vision. Beatrice was always playing the long game, he mused. The rest of us were focused on quarterly reports and annual reviews, but she was thinking in decades, rather like you. Coming from Whitcomb, it was high praise indeed. As he excused himself to rejoin the gala, I remained on the terrace a moment longer, breathing in the cool evening air. Boston stretched before me, its lights shimmering against the harbor. I thought about how my relationship with this city had changed, how it had gone from a place I had fled to a place where I had found an unexpected purpose. Owen joined me, slipping his arm around my waist. Everything okay, just taking it all in, I replied. It's been quite a year. He smiled, the camera hanging around his neck, temporarily forgotten. Ready for what's next. What was next was both personal and professional. Owen and I had purchased property in Colorado, a small ranch with space for his photography studio and my growing environmental consultancy. We were getting married in the spring, a small ceremony in the mountains with close friends and, yes, my parents in attendance. The club would continue its evolution under the leadership of a diverse board. I would remain involved, but from a distance, focusing on my own work while ensuring my grandmother's legacy remained intact. The third floor had become a thriving innovation hub, hosting everything from medical technology startups to environmental policy think tanks. The Chen Scholarship was fully funded for a decade, with plans to expand nationally. "More than ready," I answered, leaning against him. "This chapter is ending beautifully, but I'm excited for our story." As we returned to the gala, I was struck by how different this felt from the club events of my childhood. There was joy here and purpose, not the forced gaiety and strategic networking I had grown up observing. People were connecting authentically across backgrounds and generations, united by shared values rather than shared privilege. My mother waved us over to her table where she was deep in conversation with Mrs. Chen about expanding the scholarship program. My father stood nearby, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen him in this building, jacket off and actually laughing at something one of the scholarship recipients had said. "Waverly was just telling me about your wedding plans," my mother said as we sat down. "I hope you don't mind that I suggested a few local vendors for the flowers. Colorado has such unique flora, it should be showcased properly." Owen caught my eye, amused. Some things hadn't changed entirely. My mother would always have opinions about presentation, but her interest now felt like genuine participation rather than control. Her suggestions offered rather than imposed. "We'd welcome the recommendations," he told her graciously. "And we're hoping you both might come out a few days early, maybe see some of the conservation work Waverly's firm has been doing in the area." "I'd like that," my father said, surprising me. "I've been reading about your watershed restoration project. Impressive results." The conversation flowed easily. After that, touching on our work, the foundation, my parents' new interests, now that they were stepping back from their former roles. There was an ease between us that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Not perfect understanding perhaps, but genuine effort on all sides. As the evening wound down, I found myself back at the podium making closing remarks. The room was still full, people reluctant to end a night that had celebrated not just the scholarship recipients, but the transformation of an institution. "Before you go, I want to thank everyone who has been part of this journey," I said. "Change isn't easy, especially in a place with such deep traditions. It requires courage to examine the past honestly, vision to imagine a different future, and commitment to do the work of transformation." I looked out at the diverse faces before me, old and young, from various backgrounds and walks of life, all now part of the club's extended community. A year ago, I inherited something I never expected, not just ownership of a building or an institution, but responsibility for a legacy. Together, we've honored that legacy, not by preserving the club exactly as it was, but by helping it become what it always should have been: a place where excellence is recognized regardless of background, where privilege comes with responsibility, and where tradition and innovation strengthen rather than oppose each other. As applause filled the room, I felt a deep sense of completion. The revenge I had briefly savored at that brunch a year ago had evolved into something far more meaningful: restoration. Not just of an institution, but of relationships, of possibilities, of justice long deferred. Later that night, as Owen and I walked back to our hotel along Boston's historic streets, he asked what I was thinking, about how differently things turned out than I expected. I admitted, "When Grandma Beatrice left me the club, I thought it was about giving me power over my parents, about finally turning the tables. But it wasn't about power at all, it was about responsibility. About using privilege to open doors rather than keep them closed." "She knew you'd figure that out," Owen said confidently. "That's why she chose you." I nodded, thinking of my grandmother's letter, of her quiet accumulation of influence over decades, of how she had used her position to make way for change, rather than to simply enjoy its benefits. There was a lesson there that I had nearly missed in my initial satisfaction at seeing my parents humbled. The real revenge wasn't in making my parents uncomfortable for an afternoon, I realized. It was in creating something they couldn't have imagined, something better than the exclusive world they valued so highly. And in the end, offering them a place in it not as gatekeepers but as contributors. As we reached the harbor, the water reflecting the city lights in shimmering patterns, I felt profound gratitude for my grandmother's foresight, for Owen's steadfast support for the opportunity to turn an inheritance into something truly valuable. The Metropolitan Club was no longer a symbol of everything I had rejected in my parents' world. It had become a bridge between past and future, between tradition and progress, between the family I had been born into and the life I was choosing to create. Justice, it turned out, wasn't served cold after all. It was built patiently, inclusively, with an eye toward healing rather than harm. My parents' laughter at my jeans that day had been the final moment of an old story. Everything since had been the beginning of a new one, a better one written together. This journey has taught me so much about family justice and true transformation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever experienced a moment where family karma came full circle in your life? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about creating something better. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I hope the lessons from my family revenge story inspire your own path to authentic living.